And I do appreciate AAA coming up with some constructive ideas on this. I've never been a fan of cameras like this. Are there any recommendations that that AAA is putting forward that would ensure driver privacy?
I think there are some good provisions in here about driver privacy, like destruction of the relevant data after any identifying data, as opposed to the aggregate data after, I think, a year. So I think the privacy provisions that are in here are good. I think, one thing that I know New York has is a provision that says the cameras have to make an effort not to identify any people in the vehicle, but if someone happens to be identified, that doesn't mean that the violation is invalid. Something like that could be an option as well. Maybe a shorter destruction period for those recordings that don't result in violations, that just produce events that maybe the license plate is illegible or it's determined that there wasn't actually a violation. I think Rhode Island has like a 90-day period for that rather than a year. So I think there are provisions that could be beefed up in there. But overall, I think, to me, I read this and I say, I think people's privacy is protected in terms of identifying information, being able to get out to the public.
Yeah, and I do appreciate your time here, and also that AAA has gone to the lengths to try to offer some ideas which may make what I consider not necessarily great idea better. Anyway, thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you again for your testimony today. And as the good representative knows, she and I may not always agree on the final vote that we take, but she, like you, knows that I will continue to work on this to address any concerns that I possibly can. And I do appreciate the time and effort that you've put into this and educating me and making a better program. So thank you again.
Thank you so much.
Mary Stewart, followed by, sorry, Olivia. Sorry, I missed Olivia Rinks. Olivia Rinks, followed by Mary Stewart, and then Chris Dawson.
Thank you. And thank you to the members of the Transportation Committee for the opportunity to testify. My name is Olivia Rinkus. I'm from North Linton, Connecticut. I'm here today to testify in opposition to SB 904, an act concerning the recommendations of the Office of the State Traffic Administration within the Department of Transportation regarding highway safety, as well as HB 5917, an act implementing the recommendations of the Vision Zero Counselor. In particular, I am testifying against the use of language in both of these bills that would allow the use of surveillance technology as a method of decreasing traffic accidents. The Department of Transportation uses a study from 2002 to support their suggestion that camera usage decreases accidents, but this is not a commonly accepted fact. And additionally, there's also evidence to suggest the opposite is true and accidents can be increased with camera usage. Not to mention, a camera being able to issue a ticket after the fact is not eliminating all the immediate threats. Not going to prevent an accident from happening in real time, nor is it able to effectively and quickly respond to an accident. In addition to the question of increased versus decreased safety, the use of cameras is a violation of an individual's Fourth Amendment right to not have their person or property subject to search or surveillance without adequate cause and a warrant. The constitutional rights of everyone, not simply an individual who receives a ticket for a violation caught on film, are being violated by these surveillance devices. As a concerned citizen and a taxpayer of Connecticut, I don't want to see my taxes going towards ineffective over-policing solutions. In particular, as others have mentioned, in regards to the fact that most often the communities subject to unconstitutional surveillance and over-policing are predominantly Black and Brown communities. I would also like to comment more specifically on HB 5917, an act implementing the recommendations of the Vision Zero Council, specifically on Section 8B and the formation of a fatal collision reduction team to identify traffic violations commonly believed to lead to accidents. As per the recently adopted recommendations of the Police Accountability and Transparency Task Force, many traffic violations that are not believed to lead to accidents have been reduced to secondary traffic violations in order to reduce unnecessary police stops and the potential of police contact from escalating into the use of force. I hope legislators will keep these recommended reductions in mind when discussing the formation of this team to prevent the use of minor traffic stops, which are not found to cause accidents, from becoming a pretext for unnecessary stops. In addition, I'm also opposed to the section 16, which increases the ability of the Department of Transportation to rely on eminent domain. Rather than relying on automated surveillance and other methods, over-policing methods of reducing accidents, legislators might seriously consider the recommendations made by the Vision Zero Council in regards to reducing or altogether eliminating the ability of drivers to turn right on red. In addition, increased funding to public transportation would increase accessibility and affordability of these services, would not only reduce pedestrian danger, but would also reduce the cost and burden of over-reliance on personal vehicles on both Connecticut residents as well as
Excuse me, Ms. Rankus, just a heads up, you're at that 3-minute marker.
Thank you. I'm finished. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony, Ms. Rinks. I wondered, you know, obviously it's the goal of the Vision Zero Council to reduce crashes and reduce fatalities and injuries due to vehicle crashes or otherwise with bikes and pedestrians and so forth. You mentioned the red light cameras and speed cameras as actually not providing safety, but rather actually causing more accidents. And I just wondered if you have that data, you know, where that data could be found so that the committee members might have access to it.
Yes, thank you. The information where I got that was from the CDC website.
So the CDC website indicates that these cameras actually increase the number of accidents?
No, it was not conclusive either way.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? No. Okay, thank you so much for your testimony, Ms. Rinks. Next, we have Mary Stewart, who I see is in the waiting room. If Ms. Stewart, you just want to accept the invite into become a panelist, you would be next, followed by Chris Dawson. Okay, we will go to Chris Dawson. Welcome.
Okay, thank you. My name is Chris Dawson. I live in Stamford, and I strongly encourage this committee to support the bill. I know Representative Lamar, I'm not sure if he's there right at the moment, but I sincerely appreciate his thoughtful leadership and beg his indulgence here, but I've got a little tough love about some aspects of the bill. I've been a runner since the early 70s and a triathlete the last 20 years. So my comments are through the experience of being uncomfortably close to vehicles. And if I only make one point today, it's that human nature won't change, but road engineering can. Now, I'm a local community advocate in Stamford, working to create safe neighborhoods and streets to walk, bike, run, or push a baby stroller. Safe streets and neighborhoods will nurture a thriving, sustainable Stamford, leading to reduced car dependency and its direct benefit of reduced carbon emissions. Less car dependence will cause people to look to alternative transportation and improved transit services. And in a testament to Stamford's growing cool city vibe, young people are flocking here with high growth employers chasing right behind them. Now, the future is bright, but the tragic fact is our streets aren't safe yet. Last month, Stamford lost 2 more citizens who were killed on a state road by a speeding driver while walking home from work. This is a statewide problem. Now, this act requires each municipality to adopt a complete streets plan to be eligible for certain state grants. That doesn't go near far enough. Each municipality needs to both adopt and then implement a complete streets plan or jeopardize all state level roadway infrastructure funding and grants. Where's the accountability if the plan is not implemented? 830G was written in 1990, but the time has revealed that it has easily circumvented by towns. So will complete streets be this generation's 830G? Let's talk about state roads within a town. State roads are designed to move quickly, vehicles quickly, and are often the least safe roads. Who is responsible for a complete streets plan for state roads? certainly not the municipality. So why is the state off the hook for a complete streets plan for state roads? What's the financial penalty for the state's noncompliance? And is the state even accountable? Let's talk for a second about sidewalks along state streets in designated urban areas. We need a provision in this bill that the state must take responsibility for the funding, construction, and maintenance of sidewalks along their right of way. I fully support the Idaho stop and the prohibition of right turn on red at intersections with crosswalks. At all signalized intersections, the right turn lane should be repurposed for protected bike lanes, wider sidewalks, pedestrian safety islands with protective bollards, and curb bump outs to shorten the distance across intersections. I fully support automated traffic enforcement. Who exactly are we protecting by not passing this provision? The top violator is someone who willfully and repeatedly speeds by schools, hospitals, construction sites, and busy intersections. Just why are we protecting that driver? I recommend an ombudsman to be created to protect citizen appeal process.
Excuse me, Mr. Dawson, just a heads up, you're at the 3-minute marker.
Thank you. So I recommend an ombudsman to be created to protect a citizen appeal process, as well as to oversee data protection, privacy, and an equitable placement of the technology. Finally, I know that Connecticut is known as the land of steady habits, but does every other state need to approve it before we adopt it? That's it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Dawson. Really appreciate your comments today and your advocacy on the matter. I do not see any questions from the committee. So thanks again for your time.
Okay.
We've got Shauna Kitzman next, followed by Dana Ziob.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me okay?
We can. Thank you. Welcome.
Okay, thank you. Hi, my name is Shauna Kitzman, and I'm here today to express my support of HB 5917, an act implementing the recommendations of the Vision Zero Council. I'm a project manager with Tool Design Group, and my work entails planning and advocating for safe and comfortable pedestrian, bicyclist, and transit networks throughout the Northeast. As a national firm, I work with some of the country's best safety experts, engineers, data analysts, and planners, and I can see what other communities throughout the country are doing to make our roadways safer. I'm a West Hartford native and a resident. Our community experienced a pedestrian death in June, and in December of 2022, we had 5 roadway fatalities, including 2 pedestrians, and a crash that resulted in a serious pedestrian injury. Beyond being sad and frustrated about these preventable roadway deaths, I feel incredibly vulnerable as a parent, pedestrian, and a bicyclist. I allow my older kids, a 12 and 9-year-old, to walk to our nearest CVS. It's about 2 miles round trip. Our neighborhood does not have sidewalks, and getting there requires crossing a major intersection. I want my kids to exercise their freedom, and I want them to roam and feel comfortable in their community. Furthermore, I don't want to have to drive them even for the shortest of trips, but letting them go and letting them walk on our streets causes me and my husband major anxiety. Every time they depart, we review the rules of the road, walk against traffic, use crosswalks, wait for the cross signal, assume drivers aren't paying attention because a lot of them aren't. Don't listen to headphones, and be vigilant. The Vision Zero bill will improve Connecticut roadway safety by transferring some of the burden of traveling defensively from pedestrians, bicyclists, skateboarders, and scooter riders, as well as wheelchair users. It'll place the burden more on our towns and on drivers. I commend communities like Stamford and West Hartford who are moving forward to become Vision Zero communities. However, I'm not sure that either of these communities have enough funding in place to execute the plans fully. I want all of our communities to have access to Safe Streets for All grant program funding, and our communities must have a complete streets plan or Vision Zero plan in place in order to gain access to that funding. That is all for me today, and thank you all for your time.
Thank you so much, Ms. Kitzman, for your testimony. And I'm in total agreement that everybody deserves the right to feel safe when they're recreating or commuting. So I can appreciate your comments today. Representative Farrar has a question for you. Thank you so much for being here. I'm so glad for you to share your perspective as a parent, but also as your perspective as a planner and an expert in this area. And as someone who also resides in West Hartford, I really appreciate you highlighting just the complete devastation that our community has felt over the last couple months and your activism continuously on this issue. And I particularly wanted to ask, I know you have, again, all of this expertise in regards to planning, but one of the components of this bill is also on education opportunities, particularly with our schools and students. And I'm curious, Shauna, I loved hearing you commenting on some of the education that you're providing for your kids, but I'm curious on your thoughts on how we can do better by educating our students in our schools on safety as well.
Thank you, Representative Farrar, and thank you, as always, for your service. I'm so happy to see you here today. Yeah, I think, well, I was very happy to hear Commissioner Ucalito mention that CONDOT just hired their Safe Routes to School coordinator. That is very exciting news. I'm very pleased to hear it. I am working on a project right now in Newport, Rhode Island. We're working, I just did some focus groups last week for a project, and I learned that all, I think, like 3rd and 5th graders in the Newport School District get by default education on how to be safe travelers, either by walking or by riding bikes through a nonprofit called Bike Newport. They're doing education and training, pushing into schools and, building that capacity among our young people, which I think is crucial. And while I was there, I was like, why are we not doing this in West Hartford and our other Connecticut communities? We have to build a culture of bicycling and walking as a very viable mode if we want to combat our climate crisis. So I think there's so much we can do. I'm happy to be a champion. I would love to see more curriculum in our schools. And I think we have a wealth of nonprofits and other advocacy groups who would be happy to join in that education.
Thank you for that. And as you said, yourself and so many of the bike walk advocates in West Hartford, I know they would sign up in an instant to be helpful, particularly in these education efforts. And I just thank you for noting in particular the immense need for funding support and for our Complete Streets projects. We've seen several projects get off the ground in West Hartford, but I know that for many of us to better connect our neighborhoods with our transit, that funding in the design is critical. So we definitely will be looking at that closely in our committee and how we move forward in the budget process. But thank you so much for being here, Shauna.
You're welcome, and thank you.
Thank you, Representative. I don't see any other questions. So thank you again, Ms. Kitzman, for your time and patience as we get through this list of folks signed up to testify.
Okay.
Next, we have Mary Cochran, followed by Jerry Silver, followed by Mary Donegan. Welcome, Mary.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Senator Cohen, Representative Lamar, and distinguished members of the Transportation Commission. My name is Mary Cochran. I live in Hartford, just a few blocks from the Capitol, actually, and I'm a board member at Bike Walk Connecticut. Bike Walk Connecticut strongly supports House Bill 5917. Our organization seeks to make walking and bicycling safe, feasible, and attractive in Connecticut. And you've heard the statistics today. I won't repeat them, but they're going in the wrong direction. 5917 represents the thoughtful views of advocates, the DOT, towns, and organizations, and it brings forth established best policy nationally. I'd like to highlight Bike Walk Connecticut's support of 3 things in particular. First, we strongly support education of all drivers through information shared at license renewal, and we further request that this be amended to be required at every license renewal rather than just at alternate renewals. Currently, the DMV is failing in its mission to educate drivers. The current driver's manual is from 2019. My daughter has been learning how to drive for a long time now, and she's been doing so with an outdated driver's manual. We request that this section of the law, the proposed bill, be amended to require changes in the law be included in the driver's manual at or before new laws going into effect, as opposed to years later or maybe never. Second, we support the automated enforcement mechanisms, including red light cameras, which have been demonstrated to effectively reduce speed and to increase safety for all road users. The Vision Zero Council's recommendations can address the very real equity concerns about racially discriminatory enforcement. Finally, we strongly support the language that enables DOT to acquire land for bike or multi-use trails as well as for roadways. You've heard suggestions, insinuations that somehow multi-use trails are just for elite cyclists, but they're used for employees to get to work, as you just heard, for kids to get to school, for families to buy groceries. And physically separated infrastructure is what is needed to increase mode share, to reduce greenhouse gases, and to make active transportation safe, feasible, and attractive in Connecticut. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Cockrum. And as a parent of teenagers, I can appreciate that process of going through the manual and recognizing that some things might be out of date for our youngest drivers and the need to update that. So we will certainly be taking that under consideration as a committee. I don't see any hands raised, so I thank you for your time and patience today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We have Mr. Silber with us, followed by Ms. Mary Donegan. Welcome, Mr. Silber.
Hi, thank you. Yes, I'm Jerry Silber, and I've lived in Stamford for over 40 years. I'm one of the leaders of an organization in town called the People Friendly Stamford. It's a citizen advocacy group looking to keep our streets safe. Both my daughters grew up here in Stamford and in fact went to Stamford High School. I was shocked a few years ago to hear that a Stamford High School student was killed crossing the street going to school. My daughters crossed that same street many times, and I shudder to think that it might have been one of them. It's critical that we implement the recommendations of the Vision Zero Council before too many others die unnecessarily. And we need to do it now, since in the last 4 years, there's been a 30%, as you've heard from a number of other speakers before me, increase in traffic fatalities. And the proposed bill has a couple of elements that I think are especially critical that many of you have talked about already. We certainly know that speed kills and drunk driving kills. So we should definitely implement speed cameras, which 18 states have already done before us. And the results in New York City's speed camera program have found that in those zones, as we know, where the cameras have been installed, crashes have declined by 15%, injuries by 17%, and fatalities have declined by 55%. The guidelines that are included in this bill for speed cameras will ensure privacy and equitability, which are, as we've heard, are some of the major concerns. And it certainly is much more efficient to have technology do rather than have our police spend their valuable time standing with cameras tracking people's speed. And we should also prohibit people from carrying open alcoholic beverages in their cars. It doesn't help. And we know that between 2019 and 20, there were 168 alcohol-related fatalities in our state, which represented 30% of the total accidents that happened in our state. So I support all the other items in the bill that have been listed as well, that the Vision Zero team has so adequately and carefully put forward, and it'll help make Connecticut streets safe for all users. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony today, Mr. Silber. I don't see any questions or comments from the committee, so thanks again for being with us.
Sure.
And I do see Ms. Donegan on. I'm sorry, there is a person in person here to testify that is before you. So we'll go to Mr. Randy Collins first from the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities, and then we'll be right back with you, Mary. Thanks so much for your patience. And welcome, Randy.
Are we good now? All right. It's been a while. Nice to be here in person and not not before Zoom. My name is Randy Collins. I'm an advocacy manager with the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities. Here today just to quickly testify on two bills. The first is the act concerning the recommendations of the Vision Zero Council. I won't go too far into detail. We've had quite a few CCM members testify before this committee, including Mayor Simmons, O'Leary Bronin, and Mayor Cantor as well. One piece that I did want to raise just a slight concern with was the language regarding the eminent domain procedures. Well, we know that it can be a useful tool. We just want to make sure eminent domain is something that's a very touchy subject in a lot of areas. And we just want to make sure that the language specifies that that's an option of last resort. And that's something that has come to determination in conjunction with both the DOT and the local municipality before that option is taken. And we'd like to work with DOT and the committee on that language to ensure that all parties are satisfied with how that is drafted. I also wanted to testify on Senate Bill 904, an act concerning the recommendations of the Office of the State Traffic Administration. We have concerns and we oppose Section 1, quite frankly, that would allow the commissioner of DOT the authority to remove town aid road or TAR funding from municipalities for violations of any of the provisions within Chapter 249, which is traffic and highway safety. It is a monumentally large section of statute. Also, they could remove the TAR funding for regulations that are adopted by OSTA. Before we grant that, I mean, town aid road funding is appropriated by the legislature, and we think that any changes should be done by the legislature. To give that authority to the commissioner of DOT, we think is a little bit heavy-handed, just a little bit of an overreach. It's nothing against the current administration and the current commissioner or even previous. CCM works very closely with DOT, but before we took that money from a town, we'd want to see what are the procedures, what are the processes that are laid out before that money could be, quite frankly, in this arbitrarily taken. We also have concerns with I think Section 6 of the bill regarding training. The bill says that the training shall be conducted at least annually. If you're going to require municipalities 169 to participate, I think we need to look at more than at least annually. We'd also maybe look at the idea of doing those regionally, maybe in conjunction with the COGS to facilitate different towns and their ability to make that meeting. So thank you very much and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Collins. And I know that you have the commitment of the chairs here to work with you on the language in these bills. And I know that we've already heard from the commissioner this morning, reiterating that with respect to the eminent domain piece, that it would be obviously an agreement with the town. And so what we can do to strengthen that language, we'll certainly take a look at. Yes, Representative Zavistowski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for being here today. I am glad that you brought up the eminent domain part as a concern, but also the authority of the DOT to be able to possibly recommend the suspension of TAR funds, any of the road aid funds. Question: I know what my town used to do with the TAR funds and everything, but what is the purpose of those TAR funds, just for people who are not aware?
Town aid road is an annual, they're bonded dollars administered by through the bond allocations. About $60 million, I think, is what the annual bond package is for that funding. And it goes to a whole range of services, anything from road resurfacing, road repair, culvert replacements. It's quite an important allocation of money. Municipalities often, because that money has been very consistently provided over the years, they'll contract, do that work with anticipation of when that money is going to be in, they use that to pay. So if all of a sudden, if that money was taken, they're on the hook for their allocation that they might have spent with the anticipation that it's coming. So that's why the idea that this could be taken arbitrarily without, as I said, there's nothing in there of how that process would occur, what that appeal process is, and then you're short, and now a town mid-year, we can't run deficits, so we have to back budget rescissions, or trying to figure out a way to come up with that money to pay with what should have been allocated. So that's why there's this concern anytime that we see a single entity, a single person can, withhold, millions of dollars. I mean, and it could be for a small infraction, holding a little portion or the whole thing for, a road sign that you're having a dispute over the right of way.
beyond just the fiscal concerns, TAR money can often be used for public safety. Was that correct?
Snow, a lot of times they use it for snowplow measures. And I mean, as we're sitting here talking about highway, road safety, pedestrian safety, obviously this winter it's been tough. I have a hockey rink or a koi pond in my front yard. I'm not seeing a lot of snow, but in certain years, towns quickly go through their allocation for snow budgets. And the idea that you might further restrict that, well, so maybe we had pull back on some of the plowing. It does create a bit of, a safety issue for road, vehicle users, pedestrians on the side. So it's important.
Yeah, so a decision made by the commissioner could very well jeopardize public safety in a town for just it. And there's no real specification as to how large the dispute has to be or anything else. So I think that's something that we have to do some work on. And it's not a discretionary fund, it's a budgeted fund. That's the other thing. I know some of the other mandates that the state has put on towns have threatened suspension of discretionary funds. This is a lot more of a hammer than that.
And,
I do have some concerns on that as well.
I said, I've submitted testimony. I don't know if it's popped up online yet, but that money has been appropriated by the legislature.
Mhm.
So as I said, when it's appropriated by the legislature, we tell our municipalities, you can count on this money. Like this is what you can expect to get. It's not a grant that we're applying for. This is town aid road. They've gotten it consistently. For that to be then removed. And again, we don't even know. It could be as I said, a dispute over a right of way of who's maintaining, a traffic control signal. And if you look at what's within that chapter, it's a lot. And then when you get into regulations, it gets even more confusing. So to even go down the road of, oh, we won't really use it, but then why do we need it? So, and if there are significant concerns of municipalities failing to comply, well, let's hear what they are and understand the process and come up with something. How do we encourage or how do we get compliance rather than this heavy-handed
Yeah,
method?
and I do appreciate your testimony today, and thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative. Okay, seeing no other questions. Thank you, Mr. Collins, for your time. All right, Ms. Mary Donegan, welcome.
Hello. I realize I'm last today, so I will try and be quick. I want to express my thanks to Representative Lamar, Senator Cohen, and other distinguished members of the committee for holding this hearing and for sticking around today. I submitted written testimony in support of HB 5917 on behalf of Bike West Hartford, an organization I'm a board member of. In testimony from that capacity, I emphasized our group's support for the legislation, in particular for automated enforcement, Idaho stops, and banning ride on red. I want to reiterate my support for those here. A child at my children's school was killed decades ago, and to this day, we continue to see high speeds and an extraordinary number of crashes in that school zone on Fern Street in West Hartford. But today, I want to speak to you from my professional capacity. I hold a master's and PhD in city and regional planning and have the privilege of working as a faculty member in UConn's Urban and Community Studies program. And while in that capacity, I teach largely about housing, transportation, and sustainability, my research focus is on local economic development. And so today I want to talk about links between this bill and what I see as local economies, making two related points, and then relay the findings of a study one of my classes did in West Hartford. So first, research increasingly points to the conclusion that walkable, bikeable, transit accessible communities are more economically vibrant and resilient than their peers. Connecticut municipalities are old and as such have great bones that could be built upon or rebuilt to support the walking, biking, and transit modes that once dominated our municipalities. Improving street safety is good for our local economies in this sense. Second, I would like to emphasize that the concept of induced demand applies to trails as well. Induced demand is typically used to describe highway use with the idea that adding lanes to a highway will induce more people to drive on it. And as a result, total vehicle miles traveled, cars, and traffic will increase. But we know from research that pedestrians and bicyclists who don't feel comfortable using a road to get to work, school, or shopping will use separated trails as their transportation infrastructure. And as others have pointed out in their testimony today, we know from trail surveys that Connecticut trails are how many people get to and from work, shopping destinations, and so forth. In other words, multi-use trails are part of our transportation infrastructure and are as such a public good. Moreover, these trails are a foundation upon which thriving local economies depend, and building more of them should help our local economies. Several years ago, my senior capstone class at UConn had the privilege of interviewing people in West Hartford Center about travel habits. One finding that emerged: many lived close to the center or in neighboring municipalities and would have preferred to walk or bike in, but would not do so until better infrastructure was built and roads were safer. Making our streets safer through automated enforcement, banning right on red, expanding eminent domain for multi-use trails and so forth would expand options for those who drive, but also will provide safer passage for those who can't or won't drive. HB 5917 is not a radical bill. It does not contain anything that hasn't been passed elsewhere, but packaged together, the bill is a coherent document that would put Connecticut at the forefront of both street safety and creating vibrant, resilient communities, and I wholeheartedly support its passage. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Donegan, for your testimony and for making that connection that, well, the committee has made in prior years, certainly hasn't been discussed much today, and so important to make that link between safe streets and economic, well-being and vitality of a community, because certainly we know that communities that are walkable and bikeable tend to be favorable. So I really appreciate that. Representative Farrar.
Thank you, Ms. Donegan, for being here. I proudly represent Southern West Hartford and Western Newington, and we've heard from several West Hartford folks today. I just want to thank you for being here. But secondly, you mentioned that particular research that your students had taken on for West Hartford, and I would just ask if you wouldn't mind emailing that my way. I know it would be super helpful for us as we look at steps to support West Hartford moving forward. So thanks again for being here, and I look forward to seeing more of your research.
Thanks.
Thank you again, Ms. Donegan. I don't see any other questions or comments from the committee. So thanks again for your time and patience, and thanks for closing us out today. Just want to say I'll turn it over to my co-chair, but just want to thank everybody, committee members and everybody who came out to testify. There's been a lot of great information shared today and much for us to discuss and deliberate over, and we will certainly be doing that. So now my co-chair, I'm sure, with some closing comments.
Thank you so much, Senator Cohen. Just to bring back an old habit we used to do when we were fully in person, is there anyone in the building who wishes to testify on this issue that hasn't had the opportunity to do so? Seeing none, we can adjourn the public hearing for today. And I want to thank so many people who have worked on the issues that were before us today, that will be working on these issues as we move forward. There are commitments that the Department of Transportation has to get back to legislators who are on the committee, information that was requested from them. We'll be following up with DOT. If there are any legislators who had further questions that they didn't get a chance to ask Commissioner Iccolito during his hour and a half with us, if you want to forward those to the clerk, we can get those questions to Ann Kleza and make sure that we get all of the legislator questions answered in a expeditious manner. For folks who were watching at home, who were able to take part via Zoom, as we entered into a new hybrid model for public testimony, excuse the hiccups that we made along the way where we may have taken some folks out of order, not recognizing whether they are in the room or on Zoom. We'll iron out those details and ensure that the public hearing process is as open and maybe even more open than it has been in the past. And with that, Representative Kennedy, any closing comments? Senator Wong?
I think you got it all. And thank you so much. Everyone stayed through the duration of our 74 speakers. Thank you.
And we will see everyone on Wednesday for a committee meeting to raise concepts and bills. Good afternoon, everyone.